choice of which guitar pick to use may always be a matter of personal preference. And if you're like most of us, you've probably already begun the lifelong journey of attempting to try them all. Which, if you're new to guitar, well, that can be a little intimidating. The good news is that once you understand the way guitar picks work, it becomes a lot easier to get your mind around all the options that are available. And perhaps the most visible characteristics of guitar pick design are size and shape. And it turns out that for historical reasons, they're linked. And that's because the classic designs that many modern guitar picks are based on were not just a specific size, but also a specific shape. And perhaps the most classic guitar pick design of all of them is the Venerable 351. Elongated on two sides, shorter on the top, with a slightly rounded over point, kind of like a slice of pizza or a wedge of cheese. The 351 is the pick we all know, whether we know it by that name or not. The 351 began life in 1920 in New York City, when Luigi D'Andrea bought a sheet of surplus celluloid from a cosmetics company sidewalk sale in Little Italy. He went home and, with a mallet and die, tapped out a handful of heart-shaped wafers which he thought could be used as decorations for women's compacts. But his son Anthony thought they looked more like the mandolin picks played by their cousin Primo. So with Anthony as translator, Luigi sold a box of them for $10 to the G. Schirmer Music Company in Midtown, and the modern celluloid guitar pick industry was born. Celluloid was the first synthetic plastic. Its supreme moldability meant that you could fashion it into just about any shape, and you could also dye it with any color of the rainbow, both opaque and translucent, an ability that made it perfect for use in early movie film. But it was celluloid's similarity to turtle shell that made it an obvious choice for instrument picks. The shell of the hawksbill sea turtle was long revered as an ideal guitar pick material, but it was expensive to produce in quantity. But when cured and polished, celluloid attained a smooth, semi-matte surface similar to polished shell. It also had enough rigidity to drive a string forcefully, while still remaining flexible enough to return to its original shape if you bent it. One drawback of celluloid is that it's highly flammable. Its main ingredient is nitrocellulose, which sounds like something harmless that a cow would be able to digest, but was actually once called gun cotton for its explosive properties. So when danger threatens, don't ignite a pile of cinema classics. Instead, reach for a celluloid guitar pick and detonate the forces of evil. By the 1930s, celluloid had enabled a more metaphorical explosion in guitar pick creativity, and presumably also grateful sea turtle populations. And the D'Andrea company was driving it, with a catalog featuring dozens of designs that a modern player would still recognize. The large triangular Model 346 and the smaller teardrop 358 are both still popular. But it was the isosceles-shaped Model 351, designed for early guitar star Nick Lucas, that proved revolutionary. As the guitar wrested the lead-playing spotlight from the mandolin and the banjo, Lucas-branded D'Andrea pick displays landed on music store counters everywhere, defining the 351 shape as the standard for plectrum guitar. In 1955, D'Andrea inked a deal to produce Fender-branded Model 351 picks, and the 351's legacy was sealed. Fender's place in electric guitar history is of course closely tied to the ascendancy of rock and roll itself, and it made the pick so ubiquitous that even if you're not familiar with D'Andrea, Nick Lucas, or the 351 model number, its shape is still probably what you imagine when you think of what a guitar pick looks like. In Will Hoover's wonderful history of guitar picks called Picks, he photographed the original die that created the most famous shape in guitar picks. We can all marvel at how much guitar power was unleashed by this simple celluloid cutting tool. Walk into a music store looking for guitar picks, they're probably going to show you something that looks like this. This is a vintage D'Andrea Model 351 Nick Lucas signature guitar pick. And right away you will note the very familiar 351 contours, the elongated sides, a little bit flatter on the top, and the rounded over point. This one, of course, as we would expect, made classically of celluloid. This is a medium, a little bit flappier than today's mediums. This would probably be more like a thin by today's standards. This particular pick hails from the 50s, perhaps even the 40s. I will leave it to pick aficionados and collectors to figure that one out. But nevertheless, it is old. And the fact that we can recognize this shape is indeed a testament to the influence and popularity of the D'Andrea Model 351 design. And of course, the next sort of watershed moment in the 351's history was the deal with Fender that made this pick ubiquitous for even later generations. And if we compare, this is a modern Fender 351, and you can see they are indeed a very similar shape. The vintage 351 is actually a little bit smaller, just a tiny bit, and a little bit flatter on the top. The Fender 351 is a little bit rounder. Now, I feel like I've seen D'Andrea 351s that did in fact have this slightly rounded over top. So it may be that D'Andrea in fact had slightly different models of 351, or perhaps other model numbers that were very similar to the 351. Vintage pick catalogs showcasing the D'Andrea line were impressive in the sheer variety of shapes that the company came up with. And it was, I guess, as part of the relationship with Nick Lucas, who was really a guitar star at the time, a singing and playing star, that this particular pick design took off the way that it did. And then, of course, in the 50s, with the Fender relationship and the electrified, the rock and roll explosion, this became the pick that all of us really knew. And later designs, the certainly more modern ones, began to look perhaps a little bit more like the Fender version of the 351. And one of those more modern ones comes from D'Andrea themselves. The company still exists, and they still make the Model 351 guitar pick. And here it is. This is what it looks like. This is a modern D'Andrea Model 351 guitar pick. Still, of course, made from celluloid. This one's an extra heavy, 1.21 gigawatts of picking power, 1.21 millimeters. And you can see that it is pretty much dead on to the shape of the Fender 351, which means it's a little bit bigger than the vintage Nick Lucas 351, and a little bit more rounded on the top. I think you can see that there. So the Fender 351 and the D'Andrea 351 in their modern incarnations are essentially the same shape. Whether this was a D'Andrea change where they slightly changed the design a little bit, or whether this was a Fender-inspired thing, or perhaps a result of the finishing process used to polish the edges. There's tumblers for this. Perhaps that resulted in a size change. Who can say? Once again, I will leave that to the aficionados and the historians. But the upshot of this is that you can now get a 351, not just from Fender, but if you so desire, you can play a 351 from the original purveyor of this classic design. How cool is that? One of the first 351, one of the first innovations, let's say, post-Fender, that utilized the 351 shape were these picks, the Nylons. The shape here is a little bit more like the vintage 351. It's a little bit flatter on the top and very similar in size, maybe just a tiny bit bigger, but not much, really very similar. Same point geometry, same flat top, rounded corners, isosceles, triangle shape for those of you who are ace at 8th grade mathematics. The Nylons are, of course, made of nylon. It's a softer material, a little bit more flexible, and cheaper to manufacture, easier to manufacture, and also the grip. The nylon pick, the Nylon pick, was famous also for the imprinted grip surface here that makes it easier to hold on to. And following on that innovation, Jim Dunlop came up with the nylon pick that I know growing up in the 80s playing guitar, learning guitar in the mid-80s. There was this pick. These are the Dunlop Nylons, but of course, the shape is one we recognize. It is, of course, very similar to the original D'Andrea 351 and identical, really functionally identical to the Fender iteration of the 351. So it seems like the later model picks that were 351 inspired kind of took their inspiration from this 351 Fender iteration of the shape, which again may very well have also been a D'Andrea design. I don't know if it was or if it wasn't. But this particular final form, if you will, of the 351 is the one that many of us grew up playing. Here is, just as another point of comparison, a Steve Vai signature model. This one is made of polyacetal, which is a fancy schmancy polymer plastic. But right away, the Fender 351 shape is immediately obvious. It is almost identical in size and shape, right down to that slightly rounded over top that's a little bit more round than the D'Andrea 351. And finally, just as another kind of extreme point of comparison, here's a blue chip pick. This is the TD60. Blue Chip is a boutique manufacturer that uses a truly space-age polymer called Venerable, which is a very wear-resistant and smooth plastic material. And it, too, is almost exactly the same size and shape as the, of course, the 351, but more specifically the Fender 351. So the 351 design is, by virtue of its commonness and ubiquity, really almost, you can think of it, or I think of it almost as the world's most standard guitar pick. Not just shape, but also size. If you think about what is a mediumly sized guitar pick, well, interestingly, the Fender 351 or the 351 shape is about as tall as a guitar pick gets. The guitar picks don't really get much taller than this. They get wider, and we'll take a look at that later. But in terms of width then, let's say, this overall shape and size combination, I kind of think of as being standard for a guitar pick. And everything smaller than this is a small guitar pick, and anything wider than this, realistically, is a larger guitar pick. What accounts for the popularity of, or the enduring popularity of the 351 design? Well, I can offer some thoughts. The top part of the pick, this wider part up here, makes for a great gripping surface. It's easy to hold. You just kind of drop your thumb right down on the top of that. And we'll take a look at grip possibilities a little bit later when we look at pick grip. But so you have this larger, very comfortable gripping surface up here. And then the isosceles shape, the elongated sides, give you a fair amount of length to get down there into the strings and grab a note. So there's this precision, if you will, that you get from the length of this, where you really can grab the strings even from far away. If you want to play with a lot of grip exposure like this, or a little grip exposure, you have possibilities there too. And finally, the point. You have this rounded over point. It's precise enough that you feel like you get a strong enough pluck on the string, but it's not so pointy that you feel like there's resistance there. And in fact, it turns out that this slightly rounded over point of the 351 design is a key component of its mechanical structure and actually has a significant effect on tone. Thanks to its tapered shape and rounded over point, the 351 offers a wealth of tonal variety through edge picking. When played flat against the string, it offers an unmistakably mids-forward sound that announces its rock and roll pedigree. And when rotated slightly to play on its edge, it affords a darker, rounder sound without touching your pickup selector or tone knob. The secret to its chameleon-like abilities is the 351's medium round point geometry, which generates this tonal spectrum when the pick is rotated. We'll learn more about this when we look at edge picking, but the short story is that pointier picks don't change their tone and attack feel as much in response to edge picking. And rounded point picks possess even more exaggerated edge picking effects, becoming so dark and slippery that at higher degrees of edge, it can be hard to get any grip or sound at all. So the tonal magic of the 351 is balance. No other popular pick shape offers such a practically centered range of tonal variety. And this versatility, above all, is probably the 351's greatest strength. head out to your gig, but you forgot your guitar pick. So you're like, hey buddy, can I borrow a pick? Well, this is the shape they're most likely to give you. Or something that looks a whole lot like it, like this, or maybe this guy. Because for us guitar players, this is where it all started. And you gotta know how to play it, because even today, with a myriad of different guitar pick designs available for every conceivable playing style, from rhythm to lead, acoustic, electric, the D'Andrea 351 is still the world's most standard guitar pick. Cracking the Code viewers, you want to get better at picking technique, and we'd like to help. You just watched an awesome new chapter of the Pick Slanting Primer, which now includes 2 hours of new material on pick design and function, or you might say, how picks work. This is actually a really interesting and complicated topic, and we learned a ton just by filming this stuff and putting it into the product. In addition, the Pick Slanting Primer includes everything you need to know about pick grip, picking motion, string switching mechanics like pick slanting, and how to take all this stuff and organize your lines on the fretboard to give your picking hand the easiest possible time of it. How do you get access to all this amazing stuff? Well, it's so easy. Just head on over to troygrady.com. You can grab the Pick Slanting Primer as a download product, or even better, you can check out a subscription and you'll get access to the primer and everything else on the website. How cool is that? It could be 1 month, 2 months, no big deal. Get in, get better, get out. As always, it is your support that keeps us going, and we are eternally grateful that you watch our stuff and enjoy it, and most importantly, get better. So if you have a moment, head on over to troygrady.com and check us out. And as always, thank you for watching Cracking the Code.